the Axe Estuary in East Devon, the point at which the River Axe empties into the English Channel. By this stage in the river's course, the water flows slow and heavy with silt, a cargo dumped as expansive mudbanks on the estuary's tidal shores. In a natural estuary, this muddy, salty shore would change by degrees from salt marsh to freshwater wetlands and eventually woodland edge. But here in the UK, few estuaries retain this natural character. The Axe Estuary Wetlands is a huge marshland nature reserve developed by East Devon District Council to help wildlife flourish and give people the chance to explore by recreating pockets of wetland habitat within the man-made landscape of the estuary. Welcome to the Wild Wetlands. Winter here on the wetlands is all about the birds. Ducks flock to the estuary in winter to avoid the bitter northern climate. Many species are found here on the Axe Estuary wetlands. All have special adaptations to allow them to exploit different feeding opportunities. Ducks can be put into neat categories depending on how they feed. Starting with the smallest, teal are handsome little ducks which specialise in feeding on the edge of pools, ditches and scrapes. They are looking for windblown seeds and plant material, nimbly picked from the water's surface or just below with their short beak. Shoveler duck are the flamingos of the wild wetlands. Their amazing broad bill has evolved to sift floating food out of the water, and both male and female shoveler spend most of their time with this huge appendage either hidden beneath the water or beneath a warm wing. A large and very smart looking duck, pintail, are dabblers. They dip their heads deep underwater, using their long necks to get at plants submerged out of the reach of smaller species. One of the fastest flying ducks, he gets his name from that long tail. Widgeon are medium-sized ducks whose whistling calls fill the air on cold winter days. Pairing for life, the male and female widgeon keep in contact within vast flocks with these piping calls. Widgeon, unlike most other ducks, feed completely out of the water on the surrounding short grass, the pools and scrapes providing a safe haven to escape to if scared. The rich estuary mud is full of life, food for other visiting birds, birds with yet more fabulous adaptations for feeding. Shelduck flick their bills through the surface of the mud, skimming out tiny molluscs and shrimps. Common sandpiper use long, thin beaks, like tweezers, to pick tiny morsels from the mud's surface. Curlew use their long, slender beaks to probe deep within the mud for lugworms, the curve of the bill fitting neatly to the curve of a worm burrow. Just how much food is contained within the mud can be appreciated by watching a wader like this black-tailed godwit. Each time it raises its head to swallow, it has found a tasty treat. The fewer times it probes between swallowing, the more fruitful the feeding. A female kestrel cuts a lonely figure above the winter landscape. The cold weather means this kestrel needs all the hunting available here to herself, as a kestrel's hunting method is an exhausting process. The more time she can spend quietly perched, the better. Hovering like this requires an enormous effort. Wings beat constantly to counteract the pull of gravity, while that broad tail continually adjusts against buffeting winds to keep her still. Her head is fixed, motionless. She's searching far below for vole runs through the rough grass. Given away by the vole's almost perpetual urination, a territorial marker between voles, these tracks are visible to the kestrel's ultraviolet vision. When a vole is spotted, the kestrel will descend in stages, careful not to alert the small mammal to its presence. Eyes transfixed on her quarry, the vole has no inkling of the threat overhead. As the kestrel slips lower, she maintains her focus on the speedy vole. Wings twist on her final approach. But, despite that glowing urine, voles often escape. Aside from feeding, the next most pressing activity for birds is to keep their plumage in pristine condition. This is especially important in the depths of winter. Spending their lives swimming in brown estuary water and walking over thick, sticky mud, it's a wonder how mute swans like this remain ghostly white. Hours of the day are committed to preening, grooming individual feathers and coating them with a rich waterproofing oil secreted from a gland on the top of the bird's tail. This mute swan picks up the oil on the bottom of her beak and uses that long, flexible neck to ensure every single one of her 25,000 feathers is treated with this life-preserving fluid. Once satisfied, she's free to get on with the rest of her day. Winter is all about survival. Feeding, preening precious insulating feathers and generally conserving energy by doing as little as possible. Life, however, really kicks off in the spring. Arguably the poster child of the ancestry wetlands, little egrets have gradually reappeared as a breeding bird in Devon over the last 30 years. After spending the winter fiercely defending their solitude, little egrets group together in spring to breed in large colonies. With their dandy crest and chest quills indicating full breeding plumage, this is the one time of the year when an egret will tolerate another in its personal space. Egrets are master fishermen, wading through the shallow water, watching for fish to reveal themselves by moving. Whilst wading, egrets will shake their bright yellow feet under the water to spook fish and allow the bird its sighter. Forward-facing eyes give them excellent depth perception to judge the distance of the strike, before that needle-sharp beak stabs like a harpoon to snaffle a meal, in this case, a small eel. In the summer months, it's the insect world which fills the skies with life, as dragonflies and damselflies emerge for their brief aerial adulthood. Huge eyes give these ancient insects excellent vision, and their prey is caught on the wing, hunted down by sight. But this adult stage is only the tip of their iceberg of life. The transition between water-breathing swimmer and air-breathing flyer is the most dramatic and dangerous part of their existence. Very early on a summer morning, a fully grown darter nymph pulls itself up out of the water on a reed stem. It works hard to hook its feet into the stem and anchor itself firmly in position. It's about to enter a stage in which it is completely helpless. A good grip at this point is essential. Fluid is coursing through the adult dragonfly, which currently lies just beneath the old restrictive skin. The entire body of the nymph can be seen to pulse and throb. The old skin hardens, and as the pressure builds within, it splits, releasing the adult from its youthful limits. The huge adult eyes, which until this moment have been peeping out through narrow nymph goggles, now get their first glimpse of the world. Exhausted, the dragonfly falls back as it gathers its energy for one final push. A strong flip, and the darter frees its abdomen from the vacant skin and regains an upright position. Over the next hour or so, it will remain helpless as it fills wing veins and stretches these fabulous structures, whilst hardening its new skin. The wings reach outward for the first time. This dragonfly will never again fold its wings above its body. They are firmly locked into the flight position. The newly emerged dragonfly is known as a tenorol. It's coloured a smudgy green, giving it a little camouflage while it spends the next few days feeding and growing in the hedges and trees nearby, well away from the competition of the water's edge. By the time this dragonfly returns, he will have to compete with other strong adults, patrol a territory, find a mate and lay fertilised eggs to ensure the continuation of life next summer. The mown paths through the fields of the nature reserve provide an unusual feeding opportunity for a very familiar bird. This young blackbird has learnt that there's plenty of food to be found in the thicker grass along the edges of the paths. Caterpillars like this tasty morsel are important packets of protein for a growing bird. But this greedy guy has developed a taste for an altogether larger meal: slugs. The blackbird repeatedly wipes the slug across the turf, using the damp grass like a flannel to clean off the bitter-tasting slime. However, the more the slug is poked, prodded and pecked, the more thick mucus it exudes. After a mucus marathon, it's the blackbird that triumphs, and its efforts are rewarded with a big beakful. And, despite what we might think, the effort seems to be worthwhile, as this particular bird has developed quite a taste for these slimy snacks. There's a mammal feeding in the ditches around Black Hole Marsh, which has caused quite a stir with visitors to the site. A species which suffered catastrophic losses across the country in the 1980s and had completely disappeared from Devon by the 1990s, but which is now making a welcome comeback to the county. If you are patient, observant and most of all lucky, you might catch a glimpse of a water vole on the Axe Estuary wetlands. From a captive breeding project which reintroduced voles to the site in 2010, a small but stable population has grown on the wetlands, fattened by the sugary new growth of reeds and grasses, and protected from the artificial predator pressures of American mink, which all but obliterated their like on the river 20 years ago. Water voles create runs through the thick grass on the edge of the ditch, linking small feeding lawns which they use for their daily foraging. Finding these grazed lawns is the secret to sneaking a glimpse of this seldom seen mammal. They produce these short cropped areas through their feeding behaviour, reaching up into the reeds to pull down a tasty looking stem. They then trim it into lengths their dexterous little paws can manage, before then settling back to enjoy a juicy reed or perhaps a slightly tougher leaf. Once a familiar part of our river wildlife, water voles existed happily alongside UK predators, their narrow burrows and ability to swim giving them a safe escape from these animals. However, in the 1950s, mink escaped into the British countryside and made a meal of these defenceless animals by being equally adept in the water and slim enough to squeeze down into a breeding burrow. Entire populations were lost. The vole's confidence in its aquatic escape route means that you are able to get quite close to them as they feed. But be careful, any sudden movement or loud noises will send them diving off with a distinctive plop. In this short film, we've only managed to catch the merest glimpse of the life which calls the Axe Estuary wetlands home. At a time when space for wildlife in the UK is under enormous pressure, nature reserves such as this represent a hugely important resource for plants and animals once a familiar part of our landscape. And at a time when the majority of people in the British Isles live in towns and cities, access to the countryside for people to encounter our amazing wildlife is more important than ever before. Here on the wild wetlands, our natural heritage has the space to flourish.